What's wrong with the other person?
The same thing that's altered, they took some kind of drug.
In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a disturbing substance you've probably never heard of. It shares some similarities to other research chemicals such as 2CB and 2,5-I-N-bomb, drugs that effects are often spoken of under the same breath as psilocybin and LSD. However, one of the main dangers of these drugs are when they are sold unsuspectedly to users under false names. I cannot explain the danger of being sold something under the impression that it's a well-known and relatively harmless drug like LSD, when in reality it is an entirely different chemical altogether. This sadly is often the case with these hallucinogen research chemicals, and unfortunately there has been reports of deaths as a result of this. Someone might take 2 tabs of what they believe to be LSD when in fact they've just taken a dangerous dose of 2,5-I, an unsafe research chemical that can be potentially fatal. This is why you should always test your drugs before consuming them. 3C Bromo-Dragonfly, or just dragonfly for short, is not the name of a strange insect, but actually a psychoactive research chemical considered to be a potent hallucinogen. So potent in fact, that its duration of effects have been reported to last upwards of several days. It is considered to have 1/3 the potency of LSD by weight, making it remarkably potent relative to the vast majority of psychedelics. Dragonfly earned its street name because of its chemical structure superficially resembling a dragonfly's wing. The difference between dragonfly and other hallucinogens is its potency and duration of which it lasts. Extremely potent compared to most hallucinogens, even a small dose can put you in an altered state of mind for several days. Seizures, confusions, heart problems, and death have occurred. Dragonfly earned its reputation in the research chemical community for being especially dangerous. The trip reports I'll be reading today will hopefully highlight the dangers of this drug and will hopefully put you off going anywhere near it yourself. This trip report is titled "Thankful That I'm Alive" by user named Joan Miro. Given the fact that I'm still alive today, I feel it my responsibility to report on the hell that has been the last few days. It is my hope that my first-hand experience with this malevolent substance can add to the canon of evidence regarding these incidents, and hopefully help our community determine what went wrong. Everything I am writing is based upon my best recollection, which is severely altered, so please bear with me. As hopefully we all know by now, something terribly, horribly toxic was packaged by Haupt RC, sold as 2CB Fly, and distributed to an unknown quantity of purchasers around the world in the last 2 weeks. I, unfortunately, was one of the people who received a nice little letter from Denmark containing the faux 2CB Fly, let's call it Chem X. I placed my order on September 28th. I received an email from Mr. Haupt on October 1st stating that my order would be mailed that same day. On Wednesday, October 7th, I received the envelope in Barcelona, Spain. It went directly into the drawer of my desk and was not touched until Saturday, October 10th. On this day, at approximately 1:45 p.m, I broke out the Chem X and some other recent purchases, the comparatively benign MDAI and JWH-073, in order to confirm their weight. I weighed first the MDAI and JWH, and I used a milligram scale with a small circular metal tray. After I weighed each substance, I poured the weighed material back into its original bag, tapping the rear of its tray as best I could to remove all residual powder. Of course, there is always a fine layer of material left behind. Finally, I opened the bag of 1000 milligram of Chem X and began to pour it into the tray. The first thing that struck me was the immense volume that such a weight occupied. In comparison with the previously weighed substances, each of whose 1000 milligrams easily fit into the scales tray, the Chem X was extremely fluffy. It was so much fluffier than any of the other 2Cs I've been in contact with as well. In addition, it was a fine powder, but with small clumps throughout the bag. I could only fit approximately 700 milligrams on the tray at once, so I weighed the bag in 2 goes, 700 milligrams the first time, and the remaining 300 milligrams the second time. The bag weighed perfectly. Mr. Haupt, God rest his soul, was an honest, if ill-prepared, chemical salesman. I replaced as much of the Chemex as I could into its bag, the same one that's featured in this photo. I then tapped the back of the tray as much as I could get back in. Of course, there is always a fine layer of material left behind. So at 2 p.m. that day, in a moment of heightened ignorance, I wiped all of the Chemex residue onto my finger, enough to turn the tip of my index finger white, and lipped it. That is to say, I wiped the material into the inside of my mouth, opposite the lower lip. Additionally, I picked up a small clump of Chemex that had fallen onto the table and just placed it onto my tongue. Though I really have no accurate manner of judging it, I believe I may have ingested anywhere from 1 to 5 milligrams of the substance. That is my best estimate, though it may have been more, I really have no idea. Around an hour and 15 minutes after this, my friend came over to the house. I told him that I'd lipped some of the material and I was feeling a bit weird. Not tripping, but I feel like I had a bunch of weird drugs working their way through my system. He noted that I looked a bit fucked up when he arrived. He suggested that it may be because I combined the residual amounts of MDAI, JWH, and Chemex together. I agreed and thought nothing more of it. Around half an hour later, we smoked a king-size spliff comprised of approximately 1/3 gram of Moroccan hash and 20 milligrams of weighed JWH, evenly distributed through the tobacco of one cigarette. I noticed that smoking the joint got me much higher than normal, and I'm a daily marijuana user. I had also previously tested the JWH without experiencing a similar reaction. The feeling was not so much of the lazy, heavy stonedness of the Moroccan hash, nor the spacey, dopey high of the JWH, but rather I began losing my train of thought easily, and it was rather difficult to speak. Around 15 minutes later, we had finished smoking and went to the store to get some food, water, and snacks. When I was in the grocery store, I had no idea what I should be getting, even though it was Saturday and I needed to buy my food for that day and the following. I ended up with an odd assortment of soft beverages and random snack foods. We walked back to my house, and on the way I noticed it felt very off to be walking. There was a feeling in my feet that made every step feel unnatural. Once we made it back to my house, approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes into the trip, the intensity was still approximately the same as it had been since we smoked. I couldn't say I was tripping, but I felt like there was some really weird drugs pulsing through my system. I prepared a pizza from fresh crust with olive oil, tomato, cheese, bacon, and goat cheese. I put it in the oven and my friend and I began watching a TV episode in the living room. While it was baking, I began noticing my first hints of visuals looking at the walls of my living room and the abstract paintings that are hung there. By 3 hours into this trip, I could barely cut the pizza, let alone eat it. The medallions of goat's cheese appeared to be morphing white cesspools on the bed of brown flesh and bubbling blood. Somehow, I got myself to eat 2 or 3 pieces. It tasted good, though after I had done, my stomach began aching quite a bit. Approximately 15 minutes later, my friend went home to take a siesta, and from there is where things get blurry. From this point, it is very difficult for me to describe or categorize the way that I was feeling, but I'll do my best. I said goodbye to my friend, but barely noticed when he left. We were supposed to meet with some friends at a bar at 11 that night, but that didn't happen. I put the Beatles' Rubber Soul on my iTunes and laid down on the sofa. All I wanted to do was not move and keep my eyes closed. The music sounded pretty good, and soon incredible psychedelic scenes were unfolding beneath my eyelids. Such intense closed-eye visuals I've never experienced before. During this time, my mum called from my home country, and I didn't answer because I was too fucked up. That could have been my last chance to talk here. Thank God it wasn't. Kids, always answer your mum's phone calls. I continued feeling more and more lethargic and was in a state somewhere between sleep and consciousness when at around 3 hours and 40 minutes into the trip, my roommate came into the living room and roused me. He began talking to me in Spanish, and I could barely comprehend what he was saying, let alone start speaking to him. I told him as best that I could that last night was rough, that I wasn't feeling well, and that I needed to rest. I must have looked crazy and horribly fucked up. I went into my room and lay down on my bed. The music was still playing, but it sounded really loud. I couldn't even bring myself to reach over and turn it down. For the next hour, I was in a nearly catatonic state, unable and not wanting to move. Eyes closed the entire time. I couldn't keep them open. However, during this time, effects kept getting worse. Not in a linear manner, but rather in what seemed an exponential manner. It was 32 degrees Celsius, 74 Fahrenheit outside, yet I was freezing. I was under all the covers in my bed, yet I began sweating immensely. I couldn't tell if I was awake or sleeping, conscious or unconscious. It seemed I was somewhere in between the two, and this scared me a bit. Approximately 5 hours into the trip now, I began getting really worried, so I forced myself to sit up, decided to take a hot shower to see if that would help. It didn't. I was still extremely flushed, cold, perspiring what seemed like gallons of sweat. Mentally, I was a bit delirious, not in a psychedelic conscious shifting way, but in an uncontrollable, disorientated sort of way. Then, approximately 15 minutes later, I logged online and searched Google. I came upon erowid, and my heart dropped when I saw the photo of the exact same bag that was sitting on my desk. I became angry, agitated, and threw the bag and some of the stuff off my desk. A violent reaction like this was not in my character at all. Then about 10 minutes later, I posted the following on Blue Light. I may have accidentally ingested some of this about 5.5 hours ago. Help, what do I do? Thankfully, the board instantly made me realize the gravity of the situation, especially one particular user who stated that there was about a 6-hour delay before things got really bad. He was 100% right. I threw on some clothes and shoes as quickly as I could in my condition, put the bag of Chemex in my pocket, and began walking as fast as I could to the nearest subway station, which was around 700 meters away. During this walk, I could feel amazing pulses of energy coming through my brain, but not in a good way. It felt that there was a fireworks show going off in my head. These weird surges would continue randomly until the following day. They were very disturbing and concerned me that some major neurological damage may have been done. I must have looked like a lunatic, and I sure felt like one. I was completely out of it, walking through intersections with complete disregard for cross traffic. This weird feeling in my feet I mentioned earlier had significantly intensified, and I found myself questioning if I could even make it to the hospital on my own. I was debating between calling an ambulance and taking the subway, but I finally reached the stop just as the train was arriving. In the metro, I don't actually remember anything, just dropping buckets of sweat everywhere. Effects were still getting stronger, and I was unsure if I'd be able to walk under my own power into the hospital. Finally, 3 stops later, I arrived to the hospital, and after nearly being hit by a bus crossing the street, I ran into the ER waiting room. I cut everyone in line, ran to the check-in desk, and began spitting out my story in Spanish as best that I could. The check-in nurse pointed to a staircase and said to go down there as soon as possible. I took myself to the triage area and explained the story again. The attending nurses were freaking out over the whole thing. I wrote down on a piece of paper the name of Haupt, his website, erowid, the name of the supposed chemical, and blue light. I told them I had eaten contaminated 2CB fly and gave them the baggie. I was admitted around 6 hours into my trip. They put me into a wheelchair and rushed me to the ER. I could barely stand as I took off my clothes. They were so wet it felt like I'd gone swimming in them. They put me in a gown and went to work. They connected 14 or more EKG probes all over my body and kept me hooked up to that to monitor my heart's functioning. They also brought me some special type of cardiac monitoring machine, no idea the name, and hooked me up to that too. They drew blood for analysis and around 30 minutes later gave me 2 10mg diazepam tablets. The doctor told me that all he could do was give me the diazepam, keep the monitors attached, and stand by in case they needed to intervene. The rest was on my body to fight through. I have to say, there was a good period there where I didn't feel like I was gonna make it. Finally, the diazepam began to ease my anxiety and lower the blood pressure. Now, diazepam is known for killing trips, but it merely dulled this one. The visuals and deliria persisted through the dosage of Valium, though it did sedate me a bit. Now for the next few hours, I don't really remember much. Just the screams and unpleasant noises from the EI seemed amplified in volume and magnified in the way they disturbed me. The open eye visuals continued distorting objects for hours. I thought a lot about how this would be such a horrible way to go, especially for my family and friends. What would it do to them for me to leave them like that, over something so stupid, preventable, and especially without telling them goodbye and that I loved them? I was determined to walk out of that hospital. I'm not a religious man, but by God, I prayed my ass off that night. Finally, at approximately 14 hours and 30 minutes into my trip, the doctors told me that he was discharging me. I told him I didn't think that I was ready to go, but he told me that if I made this far, I would be okay. Unsure, thinking about how Hopt died so far into his trip after sleeping, I reluctantly agreed and began to get ready to go home. I still felt awful, like I should be dead. I still could barely walk, and I was still mentally out of it. Somehow though, I made it home and posted an update on Blue Light. The hallucinations had mostly gone, but the psychological and physical effects maintained their toxic presence in my system. My post from around the time I got home from hospital accurately reflects how I was feeling. I don't know if high is the right way to put it. Not right would be more accurate. Like, I'm not tripping, but I definitely still feel like I have poison inside of me. I didn't want to leave the hospital, but they made me. At that point, I still felt unsure I was going to be okay. I was still afraid to sleep because of what I'd read about Hopt's passing. But finally, 16 hours into the trip, I turned off the laptop and tried to get some sleep. I got a horrible night's sleep. Maybe about 4.5 or 5 hours of interrupted slumber. Probably never got more than 30 minutes consecutively of sleep. Finally, around 21 hours after I had initially dosed, I woke up and laid in bed, feeling like I should be dead. Both my head and body felt absolutely awful, like I had been poisoned and that poison was still inside of me. 30 minutes later, still laying in bed and not feeling any better, I was at a loss for what to do. A little while later, I called my friend and she told me to come over to her place right away. Since then, I've been under her watchful eye, and she has been the most amazing, wonderful friend and nurse anyone could ever ask for. 3 hours after this, she gave me a clonazepam, and that really helped me. The rest of the day, I spent feeling not right. I don't know how to explain it. It really is impossible to describe. I didn't feel like myself. I could still feel the Chem X just marinating in my system, doing bad things. I didn't move from her couch nearly the whole day, and the time just kept passing it by without me noticing it. I felt horrible. Physically, I felt like I shouldn't be here. 34 hours into the trip, I took another 1 milligram clonazepam and proceeded to fall asleep on my friend's sofa. I was out within 3 minutes and didn't wake up for almost 11 hours. When I woke up, it was 45 hours into the trip. I felt refreshed physically, but my brain still felt odd. Now we're nearly 50 hours into the trip. Though physically feeling stronger, I still don't feel right. I'm sorry I can't be more specific. There just is no way for me to verbalize the way that my head feels. Physically, I'm still lethargic and without any motivation to do anything. It has taken me several hours to write this report. I have no appetite. My friend's been giving me little bits of food and I've been eating it, but I still have no physical nor mental urge to do so. I've been drinking a saline and electrolyte solution that has been helping me a lot to replenish the salts and minerals that I lost through flushing and sweating. Now, 50 hours in, I still don't feel normal. I hope I do soon. Right now, I'm thankful that I'm alive and I'm able to be here writing this report. Thanks to everyone at Blue Light for their advice, concern, and support. I'm so thankful for the hospital employees for trying to help me, and I especially am thankful for my friends' companionship and support throughout this whole ordeal. The recovery would have been immeasurably worse if I'd had to suffer through it alone. Thanks to everyone, and I hope this report may contribute into some way understanding what exactly was in that batch of 2CB fly.
That's right. Weddle remains here in the Pontotoc County Jail. He possibly faces first-degree murder charges in the death of 20-year-old Stacy Jewell. Now, Weddle told police exactly where he got those drugs from, and for that reason, Jewell's mother is outraged.
This garbage comes up on the computer, and sometimes these kids just do not want to take heed.
This trip report is titled Horrific Deaths from Accidental Overdose by user named ForOurYaoiButterfly. Anastasia Marie Jewell was the most amazing, beautiful woman I'd ever met, and then she died. It was May 7th, 2011. Stacy, as she insisted on being called, went to a party. Her friend Cody had ordered something online that he thought was 2CE. After eyeballing the powder to water ratio, they left for the party. Just a fun night, a couple drinks, some video games, then the water bottle with a skull drawn on it was brought out. One of her friends decided to try it first, as he was more experienced with drugs. After about 5 minutes, they noticed him laughing, hallucinating, and having fun. So all but one decided to take some too. A few minutes later, the first man started to seize. If they had just waited an extra couple of minutes, my best friend would still be alive. Stacy began seizing and fell to the floor, as did 7 others that night. After nearly 45 minutes of seizing, hallucinating, vomiting blood, and calling out for her mother, the ambulance finally arrived. Minutes later, my friend and voice student was pronounced dead. Is it worth it? Is it worth you or someone you love dying just for a good time? She was amazing, and now she's dead, all because of a series of stupid mistakes. Her boyfriend Andrew also died, as did one man in Roth, where Cody bought the drug. Cody is now in jail, charged with their murders. 7 people were hospitalized, and many of them are still living with the physical consequences. All of them have to live with the fact that if they just waited for 5 more minutes, their friends would not be in the cold, dark ground, but with us, laughing, talking, singing. So do your damned research. It is too easy to overdose on this shit, and even twice the normal dosage can rip you apart. I helped plan her funeral. I helped paint her casket. I sang Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again from Phantom of the Opera at her memorial. I can never sing that again. Please be safe, and make sure that Anastasia Stacy Marie Jewell did not die in vain. I never want to paint another casket. Well, that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in. I'll be uploading on this channel every Friday, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell down below to stay notified. And if you could leave a like on this video, that would help me out a lot with growing the channel. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.